I don't usually tell this story out loud because even now at 29 years old, it still sits inside me like a wound that never completely healed. But I think that's exactly why I need to tell it, because maybe someone else out there knows what it feels like to be underestimated, humiliated, and betrayed by the very people you thought would recognize your worth. I've always been Emma Sullivan, but no one at my company knew the full truth of what that last name meant. I kept it hidden, like a secret, almost like a shameful scar, even though in reality, it was a crown. You see, my father is Robert Sullivan, the founder of the Sullivan Island Resort, one of the most exclusive private luxury destinations in the world. To strangers, he's a business titan, but to me, well, to me, he's simply Dad. And yet for years, I refused to let anyone connect me to him. I wanted to prove I could stand on my own, succeed without his shadow, without his billions, without the assumptions that come with that kind of privilege. That choice shaped everything. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a used car, wore neutral blazers and flats to the office. I wanted people to see me, not my father's empire. I thought that if I worked hard enough, my intelligence and drive would be enough. But the world doesn't work that way. My boss, Richard Blackwell, was the kind of man who thrived on appearances: Italian suits, whiskey tastings, golf weekends, all the trappings of status. He had this way of smiling not out of kindness, but out of satisfaction, when he knew he'd cut someone down without leaving a visible scar. For 3 years, he undermined me in ways that were so subtle, so insidious, they almost convinced me I wasn't good enough. He stole my ideas, reassigned my projects, excluded me from client meetings, all while praising me just enough to keep me from exploding. But nothing compared to the day he uninvited me from the company's luxury retreat. It was supposed to be a celebration, a reward for the top performers. I had landed the Apex Technologies account, a massive win that should have secured my place. But when the announcement came at the all-hands meeting, my name was missing from the list. Everyone else's name was there, even junior staff who'd ridden Richard's coattails, but not mine. The room was buzzing with excitement, coworkers clutching their tropical-themed gift bags while pointedly avoiding my eyes. I sat frozen, a hollow ache building in my chest, until finally I gathered the courage to step into Richard's office. I asked him as calmly as I could why I hadn't been included. His answer sliced through me with precision: "Your presence would bring down the caliber of attendees." I can still hear those words echoing sharp and poisonous. He said it just loud enough for others outside his office to hear, ensuring my humiliation became office gossip. And then, as if twisting the knife, he added that my adequate work was undermined by my lack of executive polish. My clothes, my demeanor, my very existence apparently wasn't shiny enough for his curated world. I smiled, nodded, thanked him for the feedback, and walked out with my head high. My father had taught me that lesson long ago: never let them see you bleed. But inside, something cracked. That night, I poured myself a glass of the 30-year-old whiskey my father had given me for Christmas, the only luxury I ever allowed myself, and I broke down. I cried not because I wanted to be at the retreat, but because I was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of being invisible, while men like Richard strutted around bloated on arrogance and lies. And that's when I made a decision that would change everything. For 3 years, I had hidden who I was. I thought I was protecting my independence, my dignity. But that night, staring into the amber liquid swirling in my glass, I realized something: I wasn't protecting myself. I was protecting them. Protecting people like Richard from ever having to face the truth that someone like me, a woman, quiet, modest, but brilliant, could be both the daughter of a magnate and the rightful heir to everything they worshipped. So I picked up my phone and sent a message to a number I rarely used. "Dad, we need to talk about the company retreat. I have a favor to ask." It was the first time in years I had allowed myself to lean into the power of my name. But this time it wouldn't be about privilege, it would be about justice. When my father finally called back the next morning, I was sitting at my desk an hour before anyone else arrived, staring at half-finished mock-ups Richard had dumped on me the day before. His voice came through the lines, steady, calm, with that tone that always carried a hidden current of steel. "Interesting timing," he said. "That location was specifically requested by someone at your company. Call me after your all hands today." I froze. He already knew about the meeting. He always knew more than he should. It was impressive, yes, but also unsettling. Even as his daughter, I had never stopped being slightly afraid of how far his reach extended. Later that morning, the company gathered in the glass-walled conference room for the monthly all-hands. Richard stood at the front practically vibrating with excitement, as if he had been waiting his entire life for this performance. Behind him, Julia, his assistant, laid out glossy gift bags. And then came the announcement. Richard clicked the first slide, and up flashed a photo that nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. A breathtaking aerial shot of white sand beaches, turquoise waters, and a resort perched elegantly on a cliffside. I knew that image better than anyone else in the room because I had approved it myself years ago for the Sullivan Island Resort brochure. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard boomed, savoring every syllable as a reward for our exceptional third-quarter performance. Horizon's top performers will be attending a 4-day executive retreat at the exclusive Sullivan Island Resort. The room erupted in gasps and excited whispers. People pulled out phones whispering about how celebrities stayed there, how rooms started at $5,000 a night. Their eyes sparkled as if Richard himself had delivered them to heaven's gates. But then came the slide with the names. I scanned automatically, expecting to see mine listed among the executives, the top managers, even the junior staff Richard favored. But my name was nowhere. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. And when Richard's eyes met mine across the room, he allowed himself the tiniest smirk, enough to let me know he enjoyed this little performance. I sat perfectly still while the meeting droned on. My ears rang, my heart thudded, but my face, neutral. Always neutral. Because if there was one thing Robert Sullivan's daughter knew, it was how to wear armor in plain sight. After the meeting, I stepped into Richard's office standing tall, even though my insides felt like glass. I noticed my name wasn't on the retreat list. I said, my voice calm, steady, deliberate. Given my leadership on Apex and our quarterly numbers, I wanted to check if this was an oversight. Richard didn't even blink. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, wearing that smug, faux paternal expression I'd grown to despise. It wasn't an oversight, Emma. He said, each word soaked in condescension. This retreat is for team members who exemplify Horizon's executive vision. Your presence would bring down the caliber of attendees. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I held my ground even as he continued. He criticized my wardrobe, my demeanor, my supposed lack of executive polish. He told me to use the time to develop presence, to invest in more professional clothing, as if linen blazers and sensible shoes were the only things holding me back from greatness. The irony was almost unbearable. I had probably written half the dress code policies for Sullivan Island myself. But he didn't know that. He couldn't know that. I thanked him for his feedback, walked out, and returned to my desk through a corridor of silence. My colleagues suddenly became very busy with their phones or screens, none daring to meet my eyes. Not one offered sympathy. That somehow hurt the most. That night, my apartment felt smaller than it ever had. I poured another glass of whiskey, the one my father had given me, and this time I didn't just sip. I let the burn linger, fueling the anger that had been simmering beneath the humiliation. Dad called again, and when I picked up, I didn't bother hiding the bitterness in my voice. He said I wasn't caliber enough to attend a retreat at our own resort. For a moment, silence. Then my father's voice, low and dangerous, I'll handle it. One call, and this Richard won't just be uninvited from the resort, he'll be uninvited from his job. No, I said quickly, sitting upright, my chest tight. That's not what I want. If you step in, everything I've built these past 3 years will be worthless. I need to handle this myself. There was a pause. I could almost see his expression, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Then finally he said, "What do you propose?" "I want them to come," I whispered. "I want them to step foot on the island. I want them to see everything they thought I wasn't worthy of. But when they arrive, I'll be waiting. And I'll show them exactly whose caliber they questioned." For the first time in days, I felt something like control. That night, I opened my laptop and began compiling 3 years of evidence. Every stolen idea, every undermining comment, every meeting I'd been excluded from. I documented everything until the early morning hours. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was strategy. By the time my father's encrypted email arrived with high-resolution photos of the renovated presidential villa, The one I had helped design during college, I was ready. The infinity pool, the panoramic windows, the suites each named after Sullivan landmarks. I knew exactly where the reveal would happen. And when Carlos, the resort manager who had known me since I was a child, confirmed that all preparations were in place, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Revenge, I thought, would be best served with ocean views. The morning of the retreat dawned clear and bright, almost taunting me with its perfection. While my colleagues gathered at the airport, buzzing with anticipation for their exclusive trip, I was already boarding my father's jet. The aircraft gleamed under the sun, sleek and quiet, as though it carried not just passengers, but secrets. "Welcome aboard, Miss Sullivan." Diane, the flight attendant who had worked for our family for years, greeted me warmly. She looked at me with recognition, not just as her employer's daughter, but as someone she'd watched grow up. "How's your daughter doing at UCLA?" I asked, remembering. Her face lit up with genuine surprise. "She's thriving. Architecture suits her." "I'm glad," I said softly. And I meant it. That was the difference between me and men like Richard. I remembered people. I cared. For 3 hours I sat in silence, watching the ocean glide beneath us, my heart beating with a mix of nerves and anticipation. My outfit was deliberate, a white linen dress, understated but unmistakably expensive, paired with gold sandals from a small Italian designer, and my mother's sapphire pendant, a single flash of blue that mirrored the resort's signature color. It wasn't about flaunting wealth. It was about authenticity. This was me stepping fully into my own skin. When we landed, Carlos was already waiting at the private strip. His smile stretched wide as he embraced me. "Little Emma," he said, though I was no child anymore. "Your father told me what you have planned." "Not revenge," I corrected. "Clarity." He winked knowingly. "Clarity with a side of poetic justice, then. I'll see to every detail." Together we planned the choreography of the reveal, where I would stand, how he would address me, the exact moment Richard's lies would unravel. By the time the Horizon team's plane touched down later that afternoon, the villa was ready. I hid behind a grand floral arrangement in the lobby, my vantage point perfect. I could see the doors open, see them pouring in with wide eyes and loud voices, snapping photos like tourists. And then there was Richard. He walked in first, his tropical shirt crisp with fold lines, sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. He spread his arms wide as if the entire island had been built for him. "This," he declared, "is what true luxury looks like." I almost laughed. He bragged loudly, weaving lies so bold they almost sounded convincing. He claimed to have met my father in Aspen, though Dad hadn't set foot there in half a decade. He said he had shared poolside chats with Jennifer Lawrence during her stay, an impossible feat given our privacy protocols. Watching him spin his fantasy was both sickening and delicious, because I knew how quickly it would crumble. Carlos stepped forward with perfect timing. "Welcome to Sullivan Island Resort," he said, his voice smooth, authoritative. "We are honored to host Horizon Marketing." Richard puffed his chest, striding up to shake his hand. Richard Blackwell, president of Horizon, he introduced himself, dripping with self-importance. "I believe my assistant confirmed our arrangements for the ocean villas." Carlos smiled politely. "Indeed, Mr. Blackwell. However, there has been an upgrade to the presidential villa." Gasps rippled through the group. Richard's face lit up, assuming the upgrade was his doing. He turned to his colleagues, smug as ever. But then Carlos paused. His gaze swept the room until it found me. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to first welcome Miss Sullivan." The silence was thick as I stepped out from behind the flowers. Every head turned. Every set of eyes locked onto me. And Richard, oh Richard, his smirk dissolved into confusion, then disbelief, then horror. Carlos embraced me warmly, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "Your father called personally to ensure everything was prepared to your exact specifications. Welcome home." I smiled, savoring the moment. "Thank you, Carlos. It's wonderful to be back." The weight of realization crashed over the room. Emma Sullivan, daughter of Robert Sullivan, heiress to the very empire they had been worshipping. Richard stumbled backward, gripping the reception desk like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Emma Sullivan." "Surprise," I said softly, my smile cutting sharper than any blade. Carlos, ever the professional, carried on as if nothing unusual had happened. "Everyone, Please follow us to the presidential villa which Miss Sullivan has graciously reserved for your company's use." The procession began. I walked beside Carlos, my stride steady, my head held high, while behind me the group shuffled in stunned silence. The same colleagues who had avoided my eyes for weeks now tried desperately to catch them. Nervous smiles, awkward waves, stammered greetings, all suddenly eager to rewrite history. Richard trailed behind, pale and trembling. For the first time, his voice didn't command a room. It barely existed at all. When we arrived at the villa, I took the assignment tablet from Carlos. "I'll handle room assignments," I said sweetly. And I did, carefully giving the most luxurious suites to the junior staff who had shown me small kindnesses over the years, and relegating Richard, the mighty Richard, to the garden suite, the only one without a view. The humiliation was complete, yet the night was only beginning. That evening, the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of violet and fire, as though the island itself wanted to set the stage for what was coming. The welcome dinner was held on the villa's main terrace, long tables draped in linen torches flickering, and the sea air carrying the scent of salt and hibiscus. I had grown up in this place, its rhythms woven into me like a second heartbeat. The chef serving the meal that night had once shown a 12-year-old version of me how to make passion fruit soufflé in the resort's kitchen, letting me lick the spoon as though I were any other child and not the owner's daughter. These were my people, my memories, my legacy. And yet, here I was playing host to colleagues who had spent years treating me like furniture in the corner of a conference room. The first course arrived paired with a wine older than I was. I joined in conversation, easily drawing on knowledge I had kept carefully hidden at Horizon, the nuances of vintages, the subtle stories behind each painting hanging on the villa's walls, the history of indigenous artisans whose work my father had supported. This wasn't performance. It was simply me, the version of myself I had been denying for so long. Across the table, Richard sat, stiff, his fork hovering uselessly, his face pale beneath the golden glow of the torches. He tried to contribute, tossing out clumsy anecdotes, but every attempt fell flat, each word exposing the cracks in his carefully curated image. His kingdom was crumbling, and he knew it. At one point, he leaned toward me, his voice a strained whisper. "Emma, Miss Sullivan, I believe there's been a misunderstanding." I turned slowly, keeping my expression calm, my tone almost gentle. "Oh, do tell." "I was protecting you," he stammered. "From exploitation. I knew about your family connection. I didn't want others to use it against you. That's why I excluded you from the retreat." The audacity nearly stole my breath. He had the gall to rewrite his cruelty as concern, as though erasing history with one desperate lie. I simply looked at him, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch until his words collapsed under their own weight. Then I excused myself, rising to check on dessert preparations. I didn't need to destroy him with theatrics. His unraveling was theater enough. The next 2 days unfolded with a quiet inevitability. My colleagues adjusted in their own ways. The junior staff, suddenly aware of the power dynamic, sought me out, not with fear, but with curiosity, asking questions about the resort, about the Apex account, about my ideas. For the first time, they treated me as a leader. Others, like Margot, who had once praised me but quickly abandoned me when Richard pulled rank, kept their distance, smiling too brightly, speaking too carefully. She had made her choice, and the island had exposed it. And Richard, he became a ghost. His booming voice shrank to timid murmurs. His swagger collapsed into hunched shoulders. He attended the scheduled activities, the snorkeling trip, the cocktail tastings, but he no longer commanded attention. He avoided my gaze, and when our paths crossed, he offered brittle smiles that crumbled on his lips. On the third morning, something happened that none of us had planned. I was standing in the villa's lobby reviewing the day's agenda with Carlos when I felt a shift in the air. The staff straightened their faces, lighting with recognition. I turned, and there he was, my father, Robert Sullivan. Tall, silver-haired, and commanding, he walked into the space as though he were the tide itself, unstoppable and eternal. Even in his 60s, he carried a presence that bent the room around him. My colleagues froze, mid-step, forks suspended halfway to mouths. They knew instantly who he was, though few had ever seen him outside the occasional magazine cover. "Dad," I breathed, genuinely surprised. We had agreed he wouldn't interfere. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing my cheek. Then his eyes swept the room, sharp and assessing. Richard scrambled forward, his hand outstretched, his smile painfully forced. "Mr. Sullivan, what an honor." My father shook his hand briefly, his smile thin. "The honor is mine, Mr. Blackwell." Then in a voice just loud enough to carry, he added, "Although I must apologize for the villa's sound system, sensitive microphones. Picked up some rather interesting comments yesterday. Something about the caliber of attendees." Richard's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, closed it again like a fish gasping on dry land. My father didn't need to confirm or deny anything, the implication was enough. That morning, instead of the golf outing Richard had planned, my father proposed something else, a coral restoration project at the island's marine center. He revealed to everyone's astonishment that I had been funding environmental initiatives for years, quietly, anonymously, never seeking credit. Photos of me working alongside marine biologists planting coral fragments flashed across a display. My colleagues stared wide-eyed as they realized the Emma they had dismissed was far more than they had ever imagined. Later, as the group worked in the shallow waters attaching coral seedlings to underwater structures, I felt something loosen inside me. I was surrounded by people who had once overlooked me, who now followed my lead not because of fear, but because of recognition. But the moment I had been waiting for came later on the beach. Richard stood apart from the others, staring blankly at the waves. I walked over, a folder in hand. "Beautiful view," I said. He flinched, then forced a nod. "Emma." "Before you say anything," I interrupted, "look at these." I handed him the folder. Inside were 3 years of receipts, emails, notes, meeting records, evidence of every stolen idea, every dismissal, every lie, proof of everything he'd done to undermine me. His hands shook as he flipped through the pages, his face tightening with each one. "You're going to destroy me," he whispered. I shook my head. "No, I'm offering you redemption. You'll implement sensitivity training, restructure advancement policies, and publicly support change. Or these documents go to the board." He looked at me, desperation burning in his eyes. "Why? After everything I did to you, why give me a way out?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because revenge feels good for a moment. But change lasts. And I want change." That night, as we dined by torchlight on the beach, I stood to address the group. My voice trembled at first, but then it grew stronger, steadier. I told them why I had hidden my identity. I told them what it meant to try to build a career without privilege, and what it revealed about how the world truly worked. And then I announced the partnership between Horizon and the Sullivan Foundation, paid internships, mentorship programs, opportunities for those without family names or gilded paths. The applause that followed was real, not just for me, but for what it represented. Richard sat with his gaze lowered, his future uncertain, but his power broken. And me, for the first time, I wasn't hiding anymore. 6 months later, I sat in an office that had once belonged to Richard. The nameplate on the door still read President Horizon Marketing, but the person behind that title had changed. Richard had stepped down for health reasons, a polite fiction, but one that spared him the public humiliation of being ousted. My evidence had never needed to see the light of day. Instead, the promise of reform and the undeniable shift in power had been enough to sweep him aside quietly, permanently. The office was larger than my old one, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. But I kept it simple. No mahogany desk, no framed golf photos, no imported sculptures. Just clean lines, sunlight, and a single piece of coral preserved in glass on the corner of my desk, a reminder of the retreat of the night everything shifted. Beside it sat a photo of me and my father standing with the first group of interns from the Sullivan Foundation's partnership with Horizon. Their smiles were wide, their futures brighter than mine had felt in years. Under my leadership, Horizon had transformed. Diversity and transparency were no longer buzzwords tossed into pitch decks. They were the backbone of the company. Advancement was tied to merit, not to weekend golf outings or whiskey tastings. The junior staff who had once hovered in the shadows were thriving, stepping into leadership roles with ideas that pushed us forward. And the numbers spoke for themselves, profitability up 34% in half a year. Proof that empathy and equity weren't weaknesses, they were strategies. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in the office glass and barely recognize myself. Not because I had changed into someone else, but because I had finally allowed myself to become who I was always meant to be. Emma Sullivan. Not just the daughter of Robert Sullivan, not just a capable marketing executive buried beneath other people's ambitions, but a woman who had chosen her path and then claimed it fully. But beneath the triumph, there was still a quiet ache. A reminder of the years I had lost, the tears shed in silence, the countless nights I had gone home, questioning my worth. The betrayal of colleagues who had turned away when I needed them most still stung even if they now sought my approval. Success hadn't erased the scars, it had simply given them context. One afternoon, as I sifted through quarterly reports, my assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Emma, your father's on line 1, something about planning next year's retreat." I smiled despite myself. Some things never changed. I picked up the phone. "Hi, Dad, I was just thinking about you." "Were you?" His voice carried that familiar mix of pride and amusement. "I thought we might discuss venues. Sullivan Island is always an option, of course, but I hear our property in Tuscany is nearly finished. Unless you'd prefer somewhere else entirely. You're in charge now, Emma." In charge. The words settled over me like a warm blanket. After the call, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city lights flickering on one by one. For so long, I had equated strength with hiding my name, my privilege, my pain. But true strength, I'd learned, comes from standing fully in who you are, scars and all. Richard had taught me the cruelty of underestimation. My father had taught me the importance of resilience. But life had taught me that power without compassion is hollow and revenge without growth is empty. So I built something new. A company where no one would ever hear the words "you don't belong here" spoken to them the way I had. A place where the caliber of attendees was measured not by their shoes or blazers, but by their ideas, their grit, their humanity. And maybe that's the lesson I want to leave you with, if you've made it this far into my story. People will underestimate you, they'll humiliate you, they'll dismiss you sometimes in the cruelest ways, and it will hurt. God, it will hurt. But inside that pain is a choice to shrink into it, or to rise and reclaim your worth. I chose to rise, and I hope you do too. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, or the fire of reclaiming your own power, I'd love for you to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories like mine. And please leave a comment. Tell me about a time you stood up, or about a wound you're still healing. We're not alone in this.